So here's a question to kick us off. Is the story of who we are, our national identity, is it fundamentally challenged the moment someone new arrives?
Hmm. That's a big one right out of the gate.
Yeah.
I think for many, yeah, it feels like a challenge. It's almost visceral.
Like, think about it this way. Is a nation like a house? And if you let others in, does that make the house stronger? Or does it risk weakening the actual foundations? There's this tension there, isn't there?
Absolutely. That tension is key. We build these narratives, these stories of nationhood, partly for security,
Right.
for a sense of belonging. So newcomers, they naturally prompt a reevaluation. It's almost unavoidable.
I have to admit, I felt it myself. Just a fleeting moment, hearing a language I didn't recognize, spoken loudly somewhere I thought of as familiar, quiet. And I felt, well, something. Was that just, a bit ugly, racism? Or is it just a basic human thing, responding to the unexpected? Where's the line?
That moment you describe, that feeling unsettled, it touches on something really primal, I think. Our brains are wired for patterns, for familiarity.
Mm.
Something new well, it can trigger an alert. The real question, though, is what we do with that initial reaction. Do we let it harden into exclusion?
Yeah, and here's the puzzle that keeps bothering me. We'll happily drive across town for quote unquote authentic food, right? We celebrate that difference. But then that same diversity shows up in, say, our kids' schools, or we think about who's voting, and suddenly it feels different, maybe even threatening. Why? What's that switch?
It's fascinating, isn't it, how we sort of categorize diversity. We seem to appreciate it when it's contained,
Hmm.
easily digestible, like food, a culinary experience. But when it touches the more fundamental parts of how we live together, where we live, or our kids learn, who holds political power well, that's where the anxieties about the existing social order really tend to bubble up.
Right. Because national identity, it isn't just flags and songs, is it? It's more subtle. It's that feeling in a crowded room when you suddenly realize you don't recognize most faces, you don't understand the conversations around you. It's a feeling you can't quite pin down, but it's definitely there.
Precisely. It's the subtle wearing away of what we take for granted, the unspoken rules, the shared assumptions that kind of bind a group. National identity often works on that level.
Hmm.
Unconscious, shared understanding, and when that sense of easy familiarity starts to fade, it can feel disorienting.
Yeah. So what if? What if trying desperately to hang on to some fixed, unchanging idea of us, of national identity, what if that actually pushes us towards the very things we say we fear, like isolation, exclusion, becoming stagnant? Could this need to hold on so tight be a kind of slow self-sabotage?
Oh, there's definitely a risk in clinging too rigidly to some idealized version of the past. It can absolutely stop us from adapting to how things are now, stifle growth. Nietzsche talked about resentment, that kind of backward-looking resentment that can just paralyze progress.
I think about my grandmother. She lived in a new country for 50 years, never really learned the language. She always said it kept her connected to home. Was that resilience? Bravely holding on to who she was? Or was it just self-imposed isolation, cutting herself off? Maybe. Maybe it was just lonely.
It's rarely simple, is it? For her, maybe that resistance was a kind of psychological survival kit, a vital link back to her origins, especially if she felt displaced. But it absolutely brings up these complex questions about integration, that tricky balance between honoring your past and actually engaging with the life you're living now.
Okay, so when someone talks about national pride, is that genuine appreciation for the whole complex reality of their country, the good, the bad, all of it? Or is it sometimes just fear? Fear of anything new, maybe wrapped up in a flag. We need to be honest, right, with ourselves. What's really driving that feeling?
That level of self-examination is so important.
Mm.
Is the pride rooted in actual values, real achievements? Or is it more like a shield, a defense mechanism against anything that threatens our comfort zone? Socrates urged, know thyself. And that applies to groups too, doesn't it? Understanding the real foundation, not just the glossy, idealized version.
We have that saying, home is where the heart is. Sounds lovely. But what if large-scale migration kind of reveals that home is also a set of borders we instinctively feel we need to defend, maybe even, if pushed, quite fiercely?
That really cuts to the territorial core of identity, doesn't it? The connection to a place, to land, it's undeniably powerful. The critical question, I think, is whether that connection breeds an inclusive sense of shared responsibility, of stewardship,
Yeah.
or just a defensive stance against anyone seen as an outsider.
Think about the Roman Empire for a second. Did it crumble just because of invaders from outside, or did it arguably fall apart because the Romans themselves lost that cohesive sense of what it even meant to be Roman anymore? Does that ring any bells today? Maybe the weakening always starts from the inside.
That's a stark parallel, isn't it? It's a powerful reminder that internal cohesion, a shared sense of purpose, it's vital for any society, any group. When those internal bonds start to fray, well, external pressures suddenly seem much, much bigger, more destabilizing.
Okay, just take a breath for a moment. Where in your body do you feel it? That little tightening, maybe, when you really consider new people arriving in your country? What specific part of your identity feels potentially challenged? Try and name it, even if it feels uncomfortable.
That personal inventory moment,
Yeah.
it's key. So often, our anxieties about national identity are tangled up with our own personal stuff, insecurities, fears of change, you name it. Recognizing those individual triggers can actually shed light on the bigger societal reactions.
You hear it all the time, right? Complaints that immigrants aren't integrating? Okay, maybe it's a fair question sometimes. But flip it around. How much effort have you made to understand where they're coming from, their perspectives, their backgrounds? Or is the unspoken deal that they should just sort of erase themselves into your way of life?
Integration really has to be a two-way street, doesn't it? It demands adaptation, finding common ground from both newcomers and the established folks. Just expecting one side to do all the assimilating, well, it misses out on the richness different perspectives bring, and it puts a huge burden on one group.
Right, here's a stark choice then. Would you rather your nation stayed exactly as you imagine it is now, maybe that mythical, unchanging version, even if it risks fading away on the world stage? Or would you accept change, adaptation, maybe even a future you don't fully recognize, but one where your nation actually endures?
That really is the fundamental dilemma, I think, for many nations in our interconnected world.
Mm.
Stasis. It can easily breed stagnation, whereas embracing change,
Mm.
even though it feels unsettling, might just be the path to staying vital in the long run.
You scroll through any online debate about immigration, it's just shouting, right, slogans people barely understand. But
Yeah.
then you also see individuals, quietly, in their own communities, actually building connections, doing the work. Which of those two stories are you actively part of?
That contrast really highlights the difference between, say, performative outrage online and genuine real-world engagement, building a cohesive society that takes active work, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Empathy, a willingness to connect with people who might seem different at first glance.
So what actually defines who belongs? Seriously. Is it a line on a map? Is it speaking the same language, having the same enemies? What is this national identity we're so invested in protecting? Can you even describe it without just falling back on cliches?
Defining national identity with any kind of precision that everyone agrees on, it's notoriously tricky. It's fluid, it's contested, it's woven from history, culture, shared values maybe, and just a collective sense of us. Relying on simplistic definitions, that inevitably leaves people out.
Intellectually. Okay, I can grasp the ideal of a world without borders, a global community. Sounds nice. But then I go home and I still lock my front door at night. Maybe identity isn't some grand philosophy after all. Maybe it's just this: the fences we build around our own anxieties.
That paradox, that personal contradiction, it reflects a really common human experience, I think. We can hold these abstract ideals, sure, but we also operate within the practical realities of daily life, which often means setting boundaries literal and metaphorical just to navigate the world.
A friend of mine, a refugee, once said something that just stopped me. Quietly, almost desperately, she said, "You see me as diluting your culture. I just see myself as trying to escape the death of mine." Wow. In that moment, whose perspective carries more weight?
That anecdote just lays bare the power imbalance, doesn't it? In the whole migration story. For people forced to leave everything behind, the stakes are just incomparably higher than the perceived cultural anxieties in the receiving country. Real empathy means we have to try and acknowledge those vastly different viewpoints.
Here's a thought. Might sting a bit. Maybe national identity isn't actually being diluted by new arrivals. Maybe. Maybe it was never as strong, as clear, as real as we like to imagine in the first place. Maybe it's just a comforting story we've all sort of agreed to believe in.
The whole idea of a single, unchanging national identity. It's often a vast simplification, isn't it, of a much more fluid, contested history. Cultures, identities, they're always in flux, shaped by things happening inside and influences from outside. Always have been.
We're so quick to demand that immigrants adopt our values. Okay, fine. Which values exactly? The endless scrolling on social media, the constant drive to buy more stuff, the political polarization, the online shouting matches. Let's get specific about this perfect society we think we're defending.
Right. That really highlights the assumptions we often don't even examine when we talk about assimilation. What are the core values we truly cherish, that we actively uphold as a society? And are those values genuinely under threat from newcomers? Or is something else going on?
Let's try and strip away the noise for a second. Be honest with yourself. Is your fear really about some abstract thing like culture or identity? Or is it more about tangible stuff? Resources, jobs, space? Are you worried there isn't enough to go around? Maybe. Maybe you're afraid of losing your peace.
Economic anxiety very frequently gets tangled up with cultural concerns in these discussions, doesn't it? It's so important to try and disentangle them, to separate legitimate concerns about resources, maybe, from broader anxieties about cultural change itself.
I remember this kid, born here, totally local, but he was constantly picked on at school because his parents had accents. And his parents worked jobs, tough jobs that, frankly, a lot of other people wouldn't touch. In that classroom, whose identity was actually the problem.
Hmm. That's a poignant example. It just shows how prejudice, how a lack of understanding can create these huge barriers to belonging, even for people who are, by every definition, part of the nation. It forces us to ask, where do the real divisions lie?
Okay, flip the script completely.
Hmm.
Imagine you were the one forced to flee your home, arriving somewhere totally new with nothing but, well, the weight of your experiences. What if your culture, your language, your very presence was seen as an intrusion? Unwelcome.
That exercise in empathy is crucial. Really trying to step into someone else's shoes, even mentally. It can start to dismantle that whole us versus them way of thinking, cultivate a deeper understanding of the shared human experience of displacement, maybe.
You hear it constantly. They need to respect our ways. Okay, agreed. But which ways are we actually talking about? The way we really live our lives day to day with all the compromises and hypocrisies? Or the idealized version we talk about publicly but often ignore privately?
There can be such a massive gap, can't there, between a nation's stated values and how people actually behave. Holding newcomers to some idealized standard that, let's be honest, long-term residents often fail to meet themselves, that creates a fundamental double standard. It's just not fair.
Let's get historically uncomfortable for a moment. Most of the so-called native populations around the world, they're descendants of earlier migrations, groups who, at some point, gained dominance over a territory. Often what we call national identity is just the solidified result of old power struggles.
History really does reveal how constructed, how evolving these national identities are. It highlights the constant role of migration, conflict, assimilation, all shaping nations over time. This idea of a purely indigenous population, untouched by migration, it's often more myth than historical reality.
What if we've been asking the wrong question all along? Maybe identity isn't something that weakens or dissolves when new people arrive. Maybe. Maybe it's something that's actively forged in that very process. Through the friction, the adaptation, the inevitable changes, maybe that messy, evolving story is the real national identity we keep trying to simplify.
That's a powerful shift in perspective, isn't it? Viewing identity not as some static thing we possess, but as a dynamic process, a negotiation and adaptation. That acknowledges the reality of human movement and the potential for it to enrich and reshape societies profoundly. What if clinging desperately to that nostalgic, perfect picture of national identity is actually the single biggest threat to a nation's ability to thrive? In a world that's constantly changing, what if the very thing you think is protecting your nation is actually stifling its future?
Yeah, resistance to change can absolutely lead to isolation, an inability to deal with the challenges that inevitably come in a dynamic world. Being overly stuck on the past, it can blind a nation to the opportunities and the necessities of the future.
Slight pause. That little voice is still there sometimes, isn't it? The one that whispers that your flag, your history, your piece of land somehow makes you inherently special, maybe even a little bit superior.
That human tendency towards in-group bias, it's a powerful force. Recognizing that instinct exists and consciously challenging its influence, that's crucial if we want to foster a more inclusive, more equitable view of the world.
Listen closely to this. A nation isn't some static artifact you preserve behind glass in a museum. It's a living thing, an organism. And living things, really, they only have two paths. They adapt, they evolve, they change, or they cease to exist, full stop.
That biological analogy, it really underscores the fundamental need for dynamism, for adaptation, if you want long-term survival. Stagnation rarely leads to flourishing in any complex system, and a nation is definitely a complex system, no exception.
We've been circling around this, haven't we? Have you asked yourself, honestly, what am I truly afraid of losing here? Is it comfort, status, maybe power? Or is it just the fragile illusion that I have any real control in a world that feels increasingly chaotic?
Identifying those underlying fears, the ones fueling the anxiety about national identity. That's key to having a more productive, more honest conversation. Addressing those root causes instead of just batting around the surface concerns, that can lead to much more meaningful understanding.
If this conversation has maybe raised your temperature a bit, good. If you're feeling a little defensive, maybe even better, share this deep dive with someone, especially someone who tends to agree with you. See if you can find a little crack in the armor of your own assumptions.
Engaging in these challenging conversations, even with people who generally share your views, can be a really powerful catalyst. For critical self-reflection, for a deeper look at your own underlying assumptions, it's worth doing.
What if that fierce patriotism you feel sometimes, that intense need to defend your identity? What if it's just nostalgia that's been weaponized? A longing for a past that feels simpler in your memory, but probably never really existed in that perfect, idealized way.
Nostalgia can be incredibly potent emotionally, can it? But it can also really distort how we see history and hinder our ability to deal effectively with the complexities we face right now. A critical engagement with the past, warts and all, is essential.
Consider this. What's the greater loss, really? Letting go of some abstract idea of identity, that slippery, hard-to-define thing, or clinging to it so tightly that it makes you suspicious, maybe unkind, closed off to the shared human experience all around you.
That poses a fundamental ethical question, doesn't it? About the values that should guide how we interact with other people. Is preserving a narrow definition of identity worth sacrificing compassion, empathy for fellow human beings?
We treat national identity like it's a software update we're dreading on our phones.
Right?
Afraid the new version will have bugs, slow things down, mess up the interface we're used to. Fundamentally, we just fear the unfamiliar.
That's a very relatable analogy.
Yeah.
We do often gravitate towards the comfort of what we know. We resist changes that disrupt our routines, our expectations, even if those changes might actually lead to improvements in the long run.
Picture a child, a migrant child, looking at you, and there's fear in their eyes. And imagine you are telling that child with absolute certainty that they don't belong here. Could you actually do that? And if you could, would you still recognize yourself as a decent human being afterwards?
That image, it's visceral. It forces us to confront the real human cost of exclusionary ideas. It challenges us to think about the profound ethical implications of our beliefs, about who belongs, what identity means, how it impacts actual lives.
Quick thought experiment. Just mentally list all the foreign things you genuinely enjoy. It could be food, music, art, ideas, maybe even people you know.
Okay. Now, ask yourself honestly, has your own identity been diminished by these influences? Or has it actually become richer, more nuanced, more interesting?
Often those influences we readily embrace, the things we enjoy from other cultures, they become seamlessly integrated into who we are, don't they? It demonstrates just how fluid, how permeable culture actually is. You're so fiercely proud of your history, your heritage, your roots, that maybe you've completely forgotten how to build a decent future. Heritage isn't meant to be a fortress you hide in. It's supposed to be the soil that nourishes new growth.
Yeah, a healthy relationship with the past involves both honoring where you came from, but also recognizing the need for progress, for adaptation.
Right.
Just clinging exclusively to tradition that can stifle innovation, prevent a society from evolving.
I remember seeing this older person on a park bench once, just radiating bitterness,
Yeah.
muttering, "We built this country with our bare hands." And I really wanted to ask, "Oh, okay, but who's going to care for it when you're gone?" Probably wouldn't have gone over well, though.
Generational shifts often bring really different perspectives, don't they? On national identity, on the future direction of the country, recognizing, valuing the contributions of all generations. That seems pretty vital for harmony, for progress.
What's the real cost of striving for perfectly secure borders? If achieving that means systematically sacrificing the very values we claim to uphold within those borders, basic human decency, compassion, our so-called principles, is the trade-off worth it?
The methods we use to achieve security, to preserve identity, they have to be weighed really carefully against the fundamental values we say we stand for. There can be a dangerous tension, a real conflict between chasing absolute security and holding on to humanitarian principles.
You genuinely believe migrants are the ones taking your job, ruining your way of life? Seriously, look around. Automation, AI, huge corporations driven solely by profit, those are reshaping the economic landscape way faster, way more profoundly than any newcomer looking for a chance. We need to stop looking for easy scapegoats.
It's a common human tendency, isn't it, to focus blame on visible outgroups, especially during uncertain economic times. But a critical look often reveals much more complex systemic factors driving those big societal and economic shifts. It's rarely just one thing.
Listen to this very carefully. You don't have to actively hate migrants to inflict real harm. No. All it takes is consistently, quietly, putting your own comfort, your own convenience ahead of their fundamental need for safety, for survival. Inaction, silence. That can be a form of complicity.
Passivity.
Yeah.
Passivity when faced with injustice can have profound, far-reaching effects.
Right.
Recognizing our own role, or maybe our lack of a role, in upholding ethical principles,
Yeah.
that's a crucial step towards fostering a more just, more equitable society.
Who gets to decide when a culture is pure enough? When it's finally reached some perfect static state that has to be frozen in time. Who gets that authority? You, the government. Some historical figures from centuries ago. Who actually possesses that kind of power?
The whole notion of a static, pure culture, it's fundamentally an illusion. Cultures are always in motion. Always. Shaped by creativity from within, interactions from without. Trying to impose some rigid, unchanging definition is usually unrealistic and probably undesirable anyway.
I used to fear losing my own culture, honestly. Clung to it like a life raft sometimes. Then I had this realization. My culture, just like every other one on this planet, is the ongoing story. The story of people arriving, people leaving, ideas clashing, things changing. That's not the threat to identity, that is the identity.
Embracing that dynamic, evolving nature of culture, it can be incredibly liberating, actually. Recognizing that change is the constant allows us to engage with new influences, with maybe curiosity, openness, instead of just fear and resistance.
As a historian once said something wise, nations usually die by suicide, not by invasion. Just let that sink in for a second. The greatest dangers, they often come from within.
Internal divisions, yeah. A weakening of shared values, an inability to adapt to changing circumstances that can indeed pose a far greater threat to a nation's long-term health than external pressures alone. It's a sobering thought.
There's a specific kind of fear that many people harbor about the other, the foreigner, that often goes unspoken. Maybe it's even subconscious. This deep, unacknowledged anxiety. What is it? Pause. Can you even hear it whispering inside yourself anymore?
Unacknowledged fears, they can exert such a powerful, often negative influence on our attitudes, our behaviors, bringing those subconscious anxieties out into the open, into conscious awareness. That's the crucial first step towards actually addressing them constructively.
Have you ever felt like an outsider? Ever?
Yeah.
Misunderstood, judged, even within your own community, maybe your own family. Perhaps that feeling, that universal human experience of not quite belonging, maybe that's actually fueling a lot of this anxiety around national identity.
Our own experiences of feeling marginalized or just different, they can provide really valuable empathy, can't they? Insight into the challenges newcomers face. It can foster a deeper understanding, maybe even a connection.
Let's just be crystal clear. There has never been a truly pure national identity. Not anywhere. Not at any point in history. It's always been a complex mix. A blend of different influences, migrations, conflicts, assimilation, and a healthy dose of selective memory. It's a story we're constantly rewriting.
Recognizing that constructed, often selective nature of national stories. It lets us move beyond those idealized notions of purity. Lets us embrace the rich complexity of our shared and often very intertwined histories.
Maybe you're not truly defending some sacred identity. Maybe you're just terrified of becoming irrelevant. In a world that feels like it's changing faster than you can keep up. Maybe this is actually more about your own sense of self than it is about your country.
Personal anxieties about change, about relevance, they can often get projected onto these broader societal concerns, can't they? Examining our own motivations with real honesty. That's such an important part of self-awareness.
Look, if your precious national identity is so fragile, so easily threatened, that a few different faces, a few different languages can supposedly dilute it, maybe it was never really that strong to begin with. And was it ever truly yours to control anyway?
A resilient identity, a robust one.
Yeah.
That's something that can withstand, maybe even be enriched by new influences. Fragility, that suggests an underlying insecurity, doesn't it? A lack of inherent strength of substance.
You can't genuinely welcome diversity. You can't truly embrace change until you're willing to confront the foreign, the unfamiliar, the uncomfortable parts within yourself. The battles we fight externally often just mirror the internal conflicts we're trying to avoid facing.
Inner work, yeah. Self-acceptance. They're often prerequisites for fostering more open, more inclusive attitudes towards other people. Our internal landscape profoundly shapes how we see the world, how we interact with it.
Imagine your own child, Imagine they fell in love with someone whose background, whose culture was completely different from everything you believed in. Would your love for your child withstand that perceived dilution? Or would your rigid definition of identity ultimately win out over human connection?
That's a deeply personal scenario, isn't it?
Yeah.
It highlights the potential clash between these inflexible ideas about identity and our fundamental human capacity for love, for connection, across lines of difference.
Let's be brutally honest for a second. Your persistent demand for assimilation. It isn't really about fostering unity, is it? Often it's about a desire for everything to just look and feel comfortably familiar, comfortably yours. It's about power, really, just dressed up in the language of cultural preservation.
Calls for assimilation can definitely reflect a desire to maintain the status quo, the existing power structures, the dominant cultural norms, and that can potentially marginalize newcomers, suppress the richness that diverse perspectives actually offer.
Think ahead, a few decades from now. When historians look back at this era, this time of massive global movement, will you be remembered as someone who tried to build walls? Or as someone who tried to build longer, more inclusive tables?
Our actions, our attitudes right now, they will shape the legacy we leave. Considering that longer historical view, it can help guide the choices we make today, can't it?
Here's a paradox that might just shift your thinking. Maybe the most powerful, the most enduring form of national identity is actually the one that has the confidence, the security to constantly evolve,
Yeah.
to adapt, to genuinely welcome the new.
True strength.
Yeah.
It often lies in flexibility, doesn't it? Adaptability, embracing change, integrating new elements that can lead to greater resilience, greater vitality in the long run for any society.
I've felt that fear myself, I admit it. That almost irrational anger sometimes when things feel like they're changing too fast. That primal urge to just cling to what's familiar. Acknowledging that doesn't make me weak, it just makes me aware of the ingrained programming we all carry around.
Recognizing our own inherent biases, our instincts, that's the crucial first step, isn't it? Towards overcoming them, towards fostering more nuanced, more compassionate perspectives on these really complex social issues.
We're all caught in this tension, aren't we? This constant push and pull between the comfort of belonging and the undeniable reality of change. Let's just stop pretending it's simple, it's messy, and it's creating divisions partly because we're often unwilling to have truly honest conversations about it all.
Acknowledging the inherent complexity, the emotional weight of these issues, that's essential. It's essential for fostering constructive dialogue and ultimately for finding some common ground in this rapidly changing world we're all in together.
Remember that initial question we started with? Is mass migration diluting national identity? Maybe. Maybe the more crucial question we need to be wrestling with right now, today, is this. What kind of national identity are you actively contributing to? Through your choices, your words, even through your silence.
Our individual actions and inactions, they collectively shape the ongoing story of national identity, taking responsibility for our own contributions. That's a vital step towards creating the kind of society we actually want to live in.
National identity isn't being lost. It's not being diluted. It's in a constant state of renegotiation. It's happening right here, right now. The only real question is whether you'll have the courage to pull up a chair and actually participate in that conversation, or just stay on the sidelines, clinging to some idealized picture of the past.
Engaging actively, thoughtfully in this ongoing dialogue about who we are and who we want to be. It's essential for shaping a future that's more inclusive, more resilient, and ultimately just more vibrant for everyone.
If any of this has given you pause, if you're feeling even a little bit uncomfortable right now, maybe provoked, that's probably a good sign. Maybe it's worth hitting rewind, listening again. That feeling of friction, that's often where genuine growth starts. Don't shy away from it.
Discomfort can be a powerful catalyst for learning, for critical self-examination, embracing those moments when things don't quite fit neatly. That can lead to deeper understanding, more meaningful insights.
If this deep dive has challenged your assumptions at all, please share it. Share it with someone else whose perspective could maybe benefit from a little shaking up, especially if they tend to think exactly the way you do. Let's spread that productive discomfort around.
Sharing diverse perspectives, encouraging critical thinking, it's vital. Vital for intellectual growth, vital for promoting more informed, more constructive discussions in our communities.
This has been The Deep Dive. We're not here to offer easy answers, just maybe the space to really question what you believe and why you believe it. Until our next exploration.